Hello, everyone, and welcome to the follow-up interview with Jack Dunbar of New Kingdom Gaming here on KickSaga. We're going to follow up with him after he successfully funded New Kingdom Gardeners and learn from him about the whole campaign and how it went and what he learned from that, and then kind of chat about what the next steps are. So welcome back to the show, Jack. How you doing?
Thanks, Matt. Thanks for having me. It's good to see you. It was nice to catch up with you a little bit beforehand. It sounds like, you go into the summer and then you get really busy and stuff. So it's nice to be able to reconnect after, trying to schedule a couple times. I'm glad that we were able to finally do it. I think it was good. It's actually kind of providential that it was delayed because I have a lot more that I can share and say now than, immediately after the Kickstarter, because there's kind of like an element of you fund a Kickstarter and then you're sort of like riding that high / also you just need a break. Like my body and mind just went into like vacation mode. I wish that I had the foresight to know, well, that's just going to happen, or like I'm going to need to do that. Because I would have scheduled it. I didn't schedule it, so then I felt sort of like, oh shoot, like I accidentally took a break for a week and I should have been moving stuff forward. But,
that is interesting, because I usually try to schedule these as soon at like right after the campaign wraps, because I want like the thoughts and ideas fresh in someone's mind. But I like the thought of, because after the campaign, everyone's kind of like, I'm done. I need to take a break. I need to step back for a second. And then giving you time, or other guests in the future time, to like get back into it and start kind of getting the gears rolling for the next steps of the campaign might even be a better idea. So I might try that moving forward, is kind of leave a little space after the campaign is over to let the person reflect a little bit, and maybe also, kind of figure out what's going to happen next. So before we get into kind of the learning about what does happen next after Kickstarter, I'd love to go back in time to the start of the campaign and kind of learn about how you felt during the first day, how the numbers were looking, how what you did during that first day. Kind of take me back to that first day and walk me through it.
Sure. Okay. Yeah. So first things first is I woke up very early because I'm West Coast. So I was like, I really want to press the button in a time that it'll hit the East Coast in the morning hours. So that was a big focus for me, just because, East Coast is more population dense in the United States. Also gives an opportunity, if you start early on the West Coast, that you can hit the UK. They'll still be awake. They'll be like towards the end of the workday. But I think if I did it again, I would just do an 8 a.m. start on the West Coast, because, it's 11 o'clock Eastern. It's about 6 p.m. the UK. Like you're still hitting like some really good timing for pretty much everybody aside from Australia. So, which you'll get a couple backers from Australia, almost guaranteed. Woke up early. Immediately just went to a place of gratitude, just thinking, okay, I'm really grateful to have all this support, because I knew I had support. I knew I had people standing, waiting, ready to back, and they were. As soon as I hit the button, Ben Levy was our first backer, and there were several others that they were lined up, ready to go, competing for that backer number 1 spot. So,
he beat TK. TK is usually the first backer.
Yeah. So I messaged some of those guys because I knew they were there, and just said, hey, thank you in advance. I know you're already like waiting with me. And I did the same thing with my contractors. I reached out, expressed gratitude, and said, okay, here we go. And then hit the button, and it felt really good. And I think Devin asked me this on a live stream. I went on a live stream for Board Game Hype with Devin Metlin, and he asked, what advice would you give for a person who is waiting to hit that button, or like hesitant to hit the button? And the thing I said to him, and I'm not sure this was the answer he was looking for or not, but what I said was, if you're hesitant to hit the button, don't hit it. Like, I felt confident pressing that launch button. I felt like we've got the numbers. I've done the math.
You got to be itching.
Itching
to hit that button.
I actually know people who are backing and have like I know for a fact that we'll get backers, so I was excited. I'm like, okay, I'm excited to see what happens. And I think like having that mentality going into the first day was really fun. I was energized. I think there are two things. So I mentioned already about taking a vacation, but that was one of the best pieces of advice that I got on the first day. Was Galen McCown was talking about. He was on an episode of Crowdfunding Nerds recently. Funded the game Super Snipers, and Galen was talking about how you need to like tune into your mental health, and he's a mental health counselor, so like he comes from that perspective. But yeah. I think just like being aware of the fact that like it's going to be very up and down in a Kickstarter campaign, and like those things are normal. Having the awareness of that going into it was really good. But there are a couple things I wish I would have done on the first day. One is I wish I would have taken work off, and I wish I would have said, you know, hey, for these 48 hours, I really need to be honed in on the Kickstarter campaign, because those first 2 days are, one, so crucial for funding, and two, they're so fast paced, and there are so many things you can do. Like if you fund early, you've got to send out a funding email, which I funded in like 3 days, 3.5 days. So you have to send out emails, updates, stay connected with your backers, respond to comments. You have to be on. And I think I would have opened myself up more. What happened was I ended up working on my Kickstarter all day, and my boss was like, "Where are you?" Luckily, he's really gracious. Yeah. So it's just like, I get it. You have a Kickstarter. Like, that's whatever, but you need to make up the time now. So I think like like I would have taken the time off, and I would have done the same thing on the back end. I would have had a planned break, because like I just said, your body, your mind, everything goes into vacation mode. Like, just plan it out. Give yourself that space and that margin to really engage, because it is so emotional and emotionally draining. But I think that can be in a really positive way too. Like you just got so many people to interact with, a lot of positivity coming in, a lot of questions, and responding to and answering those questions is fun. But yeah, I mean, that's kind of where my mindset was and kind of where we were going. One thing that I found really interesting is I put together this spreadsheet to predict my crowdfunding results. Like, again, providentially, Crowdfunding Nerds had just put out an episode about, can you predict crowdfunding results, before we did our KickSaga. So I had built the spreadsheet using those results, and I already had a spreadsheet, but it was a little bit rudimentary, and I tuned it up according to some of the new metrics I heard, like the most updated metrics from Crowdfunding Nerds, and some of the metrics I received from Max from Dragon Age Games, and kind of put this thing together. And my prediction, Matt, was that I would raise $16,050. I ended up raising
look at that.
$16,665. Nice. So my prediction was only $600 off, which is pretty astounding.
That's great.
Which gets me to a point about predicting crowdfunding results and some other things, but we can, I'll just kind of pause there and see what your next question is.
Well, no, let's do it. Let's jump into that, because that's super fascinating to me. Because as someone who's not, crowdfunded anything yet, and someone who's talked to lots of people who've crowdfunded, there is an air of mystique and mystery around it, and this feeling that it is unpredictable, and that you just kind of, do the best you can and jump into it and hope for the best. But what I've seen is that, especially through folks like the Crowdfunding Nerds who do this over and over again for lots of people, is that there are metrics to gauge things by, and there's always going to be unknowns and kind of things that can go different ways. But overall, there are things you could look at and things you can build into your campaign to really help predict how it's gonna come out. So I'd love to hear, how you put that together and what you looked at to try to get that number and have it end up being so close.
Yeah, so there's some metrics I found to be really reliable, and they just backed with experience. I mean, I just took them from Crowdfunding Nerds. I took them from Max's assessment, and I took them from my own campaign, and the data was almost 1-for-1 on these key metrics. Okay. One, if you have an email list with an open rate over 40%, that will convert at 10%. That was dead on for me. The other thing is your Kickstarter pre-launch followers will convert at 20%. That was dead on for me too. That was almost exact. So 10% of an engaged email list, 20% of your Kickstarter pre-launch followers. And then the other metric that was very interesting to me that revealed itself over the course of the campaign was that funding happens in about equal thirds. So a lot of people talk about a mid-campaign slump, but on a campaign that has positive momentum with backers and early funding, I think early funding is important for this mid-campaign reality to be true. But funding breaks down basically to 33% in the first 2 days, 33% in the last 2 days, and 33% in the middle. This is something that I'd always heard about the peaks and the trough, but I didn't realize that the mid-campaign could be fruitful in this way when you extrapolate it. Looking at my results on KickTrack, and also, which you can do, you could just go to KickTrack and look at the chart for my game, but also looking at the actual data that I got from Kickstarter after the campaign was over. It worked out about like that, 33% roughly in the first 2 days, about 33% in the mid, and then 33% the last 48 hours. Now, my last 48 hours were actually a little bit weaker than that, and my first 2 days were a little bit stronger. So there's a little bit of a lopsided statistic there, but it was pretty close.
Sure.
I think part of that is I stayed engaged throughout the mid campaign. I think I got some of those late backers to convert in the mid versus the late game. So I think that there was a little bit there going on just because of some of the things I did with stretch goals and some of the ways I tried to stagger reveals for the campaign so that I could get backers. And there were spikes around updates. So that was that proved to be fruitful for me. So yeah, I think that those, like, if I was going to build a future Kickstarter campaign, I would definitely keep those three metrics in place. Now, conversion from Facebook group, Facebook page, Discord, various communities, they were pretty close to my assumptions, but it's also kind of hard to tell based on the tracking data that I got from Kickstarter. It's not necessarily reliable, but the nice thing is your Kickstarter pre-launch followers is a very trackable metric because it's right there on Kickstarter, and it's actually the first metric that Kickstarter gives you. It's the biggest one. So
it's hard because there's a lot of overlap too, right? I mean, I followed the Kickstarter. I was on your email list. I'm in your Discord. You know, it's like I'm on all those things. And so just depending on where I happen to click to land on your page is what would have been attributed to that thing. And so that I think that just goes to show for me that, you know, you want to make sure that you're fostering all of these places and making sure that no matter where someone is, that they're getting updates, that they know what's going on. And speaking of updates, so what were some of the things you did during the mid-campaign slump, so to speak, to keep people engaged and energized and interested?
Well, so one of the things I did was all of my stretch goals were based on an overfunding target. I really told myself if I can get to 2x my funding goal, which I was a 9.5 funding goal, and if I could get to about $20,000, really $19,000, I'd be able to unlock all my stretch goals. That was something I had in my mind. I ended up just revealing all the stretch goals and unlocking them early anyway, because, and here's the reason, it's not that I was disingenuous about those goals or that funding. The reality is I know I'm going to make that up in the pledge manager, right? Like by the time I, finish my sales, I'll be over that funding target, that the stretch goals, the math that I did for them, that's all baked in. Like it didn't need necessarily to all be raised in the Kickstarter, as long as we can hit that sales target eventually, and we will. So I'm actually very, very close now with pledge manager sales, which have trickled in and been pretty consistent, like 1 to 2 a day. So, extrapolate that over several months and you get the backers you need to hit those goals.
So, so kind of unlocking the stretch goals a little bit earlier than planned. Sounds like it would help get people excited and energized, and maybe backing sooner than they would. What are some other things you tried there?
Yeah, I think stretch goals was big. I think the other thing was there were some things about stretch goals where I had A or B opportunities. Like one of the things I was talking about was screen printed meeples, and I presented to my backers like, hey, for the doves, we can do either this kind of print or this kind of print. What do you think would be better? And backers were like, oh, definitely do this kind of print. And that was pretty pretty dominant opinion. And it was like, okay, let's do that. The other thing is I had a mechanic that came into question during the Kickstarter. And I raised that as a poll to the community and just said, hey, what do you guys think of this? And that created a lot of storytelling and engagement. It was my most commented on post, which was some discussion about potentially changing the verbiage of one of the mechanics in the game, Prey, to something else. And ultimately it led to people being like, no, that has to stay. I love that. And it was really actually a cool story because the backer who was concerned, I reached out and said, hey, thanks for raising this concern, blah, blah, blah. And they were like, I love how you handled it. And because you handled it that way, I'm even more into this project now. And I think that was really cool. It was like, okay, cool. Well, I mean, here's a legitimate concern or question. Like, let's raise it to the community. And it's a Kickstarter. Let's decide on this stuff together. Like, you're an investor. Let's get the community involved. And the community getting involved, I think, helped maintain momentum.
I think that's such a great point. And I think that happens a lot. And I see that happen a lot in this community, especially around Kickstarters, where controversies bubble up from Kickstarters, from decisions that creators make around their Kickstarter. And I think a big part of why it either turns into a controversy or it turns into just like a reason to be engaged with the project is how the creator handles it. And if they get defensive, if they try to hide things, it blows up into this big controversy that everybody, starts talking about and could probably shed some negative light on the campaign. Whereas if you work with the folks and you're engaged and you're open about your decision making and everything, I think that could lead to a lot of engagement and a lot of positive feelings. And even people who disagree with you will be on your side because they see the thought process and the thought that went into it. And I think that's a great example.
Yeah, I think another area where I've heard this happening, I think another subtle area where like things can go off the rails is acting out of like anxiety or excitement. Like, I think having a little bit of patience in those moments is so important because you could get swept up in being like, oh, totally, yeah, let's change that thing, making promises that you can't necessarily deliver on, or that the community's not asking you to. Maybe it's like one very loud backer right. Or one very passionate backer, and the reality is like, hey, let's get the community engaged. I think that that's a very good response. I think also having the patience to ask, like one of the things I did with this particular issue is ask clarifying questions. Like I had this thing raised and I'm like, that's kind of interesting, but I also don't understand. So instead of filling in the blanks, I said, hey, I don't fully understand. Help me understand better. And then that led to a thoughtful conversation that was very moving to me. And I'm like, oh, okay, great. Yeah, let's take this to the community and let's try to resolve it. Nice. And we did, and it had great results all around, I think. So yeah, so that was a cool example of where I just think like it can be really easy to get swept up in the emotion of a Kickstarter campaign, and it helps to just take a step back and say, okay, let's just think, like, good idea. Let me think about it. That's a fine response. Most people are totally fine with that.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah, I think it's just important to be engaged, even if that engagement is, let me think about this, let me consider it, and I'll get back to you or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah, so, I think it like one of the cool things about that is it developed a friendship with a fan, a backer, right? Like, because now like we've had some personal conversation, and that conversation was really like deep and meaningful. And I feel like, oh, cool. Like this isn't just a name on a list for me. This is a person I interact with and who's interacted with me. And there's more of a relationship there. And I think that's it's kind of the whole purpose of wanting to do this in the first place for me. So it's fun to get to engage in that.
Cool. So was there any part of the campaign that, or anything else other than what you've mentioned that like surprised you or kind of bucked a trend that you thought or busted a myth that you had or something like that?
Yeah, totally. I think the mid-campaign slump is one where it's like, it is definitely slower. Like there's no question that it's slower, but it doesn't need to be devoid of activity. And I think that's the temptation. Is one of the things that people told me is like, cool it on the updates, like, be careful about communicating too much and stuff like that. You'll result in cancellations. And I think that thoughtful, well-timed, non-anxious communication consistently is actually really beneficial. So that was a learning for me as I was going, where there is a temptation to say like, okay, well, I'm just going to send daily updates or something like that. And that's maybe not necessary. You don't need to be doing things frantically in the mid campaign, but if you're doing things consistently and intentionally, that I think only benefits your campaign. So that was one thing. Another thing that kind of, I actually started sort of blogging about this in BGDL, just writing first time Kickstarter surprise updates, just to kind of share some of the things that for me were surprising.
Yeah, that's always helpful.
Yeah, I think there are a few things that are surprising that you'll run into when you run a Kickstarter campaign. One is how much spam you get in your inbox. You just get so many, and I mean, both your emails and your Kickstarter inbox, you'll get tons of people who are trying to sell you services, but it comes off as they're trying to back your project, and like it's a marketing tactic. And I've heard stories about people saying that there are like even like subtle threats and stuff that are used sometimes by some of these companies. It's just got to be wise about that and be aware that that's going to happen. I think the other thing, so all the spam was a big one, but another really surprising thing is just how much other creators are watching Kickstarter. Because as soon as you have a successfully funded Kickstarter, people will reach out to you. Hey, tell me all of your secrets. Let's have a phone call. I'm really working on this thing and stuff, and I love that. I'm a totally advocate for that. I think it's great. I've loved meeting new creators who are like inspired and excited and wanting to know, what did I do and stuff like that. Yeah. But that's another thing just to be prepared for. I think just like the spam on the negative side, like be prepared to have thick skin to say like, no, thanks, I have a marketing person. Thank you. Right. But also having the openness to say like, now I have an opportunity to connect with my community on a deeper level or with different people in my community. And I need to carve out space to do that. I think that just like with the vacations and the mental health, those are things to keep in mind to carve out space for in your life, because just running the Kickstarter is an administrative burden, and then you'll have like additional administrative things to do.
Totally. So that's a good transition. So let's talk about the administrative things that you have to do once the Kickstarter is over. We were chatting a little bit about that before we hit the record button, about you're getting your pledge manager set up and kind of all the ins and outs of that. So talk about, for folks, especially who are new to the crowdfunding world and might be wondering, okay, or might be thinking like, hey, you funded your your campaign, great. All the work's over. Now you could just, sit back, relax with your drink on the beach and rake in the money. What would you say to them? What have you been working on here recently?
Well, so retail strategy is a big one, like communicating with retailers. And this is my first Kickstarter campaign. In the future, I'll be much more clean with my retail process. But, for me, part of it was like, I spoke to some retailers prior to the campaign, but I was a totally untested entity. Now I have retail backers, and so I could reach out to them and have conversations like, hey, you backed my campaign. Thank you for doing that. Also, what, as a retailer, do you want to see from me? Like, how can I craft my strategy? How can I help with your success? Because all of that feedback from those retailers is going to help me adapt my strategy for retail and distribution. Because they have, when you're a board game publisher versus a board game retailer, your needs and your expectations and your hopes and goals and all of that stuff are so different. There's a lot of similarity, because as a publisher, hopefully you have a retail presence yourself, especially if you're small. So there's a lot of like mutual learning you can get from a retailer. But the thing is, like, if you're solely focused on retail and you don't have a publishing branch, like, you're thinking about very different questions and you have very different costs and needs. So I think learning from my retail backers and trying to craft my retail, like adjust my retail strategy based on their feedback, that took up a lot of that first like 1 to 2 weeks. Because I'm thinking this is the next stage of sales, is trying to focus on retailers.
Okay.
The other thing was trying to get a pledge manager set up. I ended up going with Hive because it's just so easy. And
I think you're the first campaign I've backed that used Hive as a pledge manager. It's kind of new to me, so I'm wondering why you chose that over some of the more well-established platforms.
Yeah, well, and it is kind of new, I think, too. I think that's one thing. It's like Hive has not been around super long. I'm not sure exactly how long, but it has some cred. It has some great projects on it. It was a referral to me from Andrew Lowen from Deliverance. He said, "Hey, I'm actually switching from BackerKit to Hive," and so I was like, "Okay, cool. Well, I'll give him a shot." And in my reach out to pledge managers, so there's so many things to know about pledge managers that I feel like are not covered many places. I think that all backers need to know a lot about pledge managers, and you need to think about it prior to your campaign. And I wish I had even more information than I have now as I'm working with a pledge manager. I still have gaps that I'd really like to fill in. But one of the main things to consider with your pledge manager is the fees associated with it. So for BackerKit, there's a charge. For GameFound, there's a percentage. And in both cases, actually, BackerKit and GameFound, there's a percentage. And most of the pledge managers out there work on a percentage-based model. It's a percentage of your sales. There's processing fees involved, and so on. The nice thing about Hive is that they only charge you upsell. So it was entirely free to set up. There was no cost at all.
Okay.
There was no upfront cost for setup. There was no consulting fee. It was just free to do. It was free to have them, and they did a lot of the work in getting the pledge manager set up. Let me clarify here. Getting my late pledge site set up through Hive. It's not a pledge manager yet, because a pledge manager allows you to adjust your order and do add-ons and pay shipping and all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And that's still something I'm setting up.
Gotcha.
There was a lot of work that I could have done prior to the campaign had I known I needed to do it. That would have fixed this issue. But one downside, like one of my biggest question marks in my head going into the pledge manager setup was, why does this take so long? Like, I back a ton of Kickstarters, and I'm like, why can't, Kickstarter creators just turn on the pledge manager? I don't understand what, and I had the idea in my head, like, there must be a reason. There must be some sort of like challenge there. And one thing is, as an untested entity, as an independent designer who's never funded a Kickstarter, there's some hesitance by contractors, either in fulfillment or pledge manager side, to really get going on too much ahead of time. Because they say, like, well, what if you don't fund? That's just going to be sunk for us. And that totally makes sense.
Yep.
So you can't really get started as a first-time creator on your pledge manager until after you fund it, because then the pledge managers will all say, like, okay, great job, now let's get going. Versus if you're, CMON and you fulfill a, $1 million campaign all the time, they're like, we'll do all of your pledge manager work for you. Like, let's set it up on your behalf. And,
right.
Like,
rolling out the red carpet for you. Yeah.
Yeah. It makes sense. So anyway, Hive they did something really awesome for me, and they ported all of my information over from my Kickstarter page into the late pledge offering on Hive. So they did the work. I really didn't have to do much at all to get my late pledges set up. So that was really nice. Now, setting up the shipping tables and VAT is a totally different story. There's like coordination that has to occur between GamesQuest, who provides their shipping rates, and my manufacturer, who provides the weights of product and size of product, and develops packaging solutions, and the pledge manager, who consolidates that data and communicates it to customers to collect payment for it. And the challenge with that is that a lot of that responsibility falls to you, the publisher, because the reality is Hive doesn't have all of the information. They need you to get the information. GamesQuest is not applying that information to customers, and they're not going to touch that because they're your fulfillment partner. It's just not what they do. It's out of scope. And then your manufacturer, is the one who ultimately has the source data that you need. So there's a triangulation between those three that you need to project manage to get your pledge manager set up. And there's no way around that.
Yeah, that takes time.
So I think I mentioned having the foresight of a vacation and having the foresight on metrics. Like I would like go into another campaign with the foresight that like, okay, the pledge manager is going to be like this. Now we communicate that to my backers so that they have clear expectations. I was unclear about what to expect. So I was a little bit vague about it.
Yep.
And I think a little bit overconfident too in saying like, oh yeah, I'll get it set up this month or something. But I'm still working on it. Hopefully I'll get it set up, in the next week or so. But there's a lot of data to parse and separate and sort into files that make sense to the entities that need it. So Games Quest is like, well, what countries are you shipping to? I'm like, I don't know. I need to sort. I got all of this Kickstarter data and I need to sort it in a way that's going to make sense to them that applies to pledge levels and product, right? Like they're like, so what are we shipping here? Whereas I'm like, I know what they backed at. I know what the dollar amount is, but now I need to figure out what the product mix is and where that's going in the world. And then I need to apply weights and dimensions to that so that they can consolidate that data. They can provide me something that I can then say, okay, well, what does Hive need to know and how does it need to be communicated in a way that makes sense to them so that the collection of those fees can go smoothly. So yeah.
Lots of spreadsheets, I imagine.
Oh yeah. And it's a good thing I like Excel because if you didn't, you would really hate this part.
Yep. That's it. You're just a glorified project manager for most of this, it sounds like.
Yeah, which is really true. I mean, I think project management is maybe the closest professional analog to publishing that people might be familiar with, because it really is. It's like, well, if you're an art director, what are you? You're a project manager. Like, if you're hiring contractors to do work for you, what are you? You're a project manager. If you're coordinating information flow between disparate entities who don't communicate with each other, you're project manager. Like that's ultimately what you're doing.
Nice. Well, hey, this has been great, I think, to kind of shed some light for folks who might be new to this or might be thinking about self-publishing on Kickstarter, kind of what's in store for them afterwards. We keep saying that on the show. We keep saying this on the show, and I'll keep saying it, and our guests will keep reiterating it, is that the end of the Kickstarter is only the beginning of your journey as a publisher and a game creator and all of that. So with that in mind, what are the next steps for New Kingdom Gaming? I know you probably have your head fully focused in just, pledge manager and getting the games to backers, but what are some of your thoughts about kind of the next steps, either a new game or something like that for you guys?
Yeah. So one of the things I did this week is I spent an evening working on game design, which is the first time that I've done that probably in like 3 months. I've just been so focused on getting gardeners out the door, getting the Kickstarter running efficiently. That was really nice to get back to game design a little bit.
Nice.
And it actually helped a lot to shelve some of those projects that were I had gardeners going and then some other ideas, and to come back to them with fresh eyes. I think I have something really, really nice worked up for one of the games that I'm working on currently that I'll be announcing later this summer. So my plan is, once I get my files off to manufacturing, I will send some updates about next steps for New Kingdom Gaming with a couple of game announcements. But one of the other things that as a publisher who funds a Kickstarter, you get the opportunity to do is hear pitches. I wasn't receiving pitches from anybody, but now that I funded a game, people are like, hey, what do you think of this game? And so I've heard a couple of interesting pitches lately. I have one that I'm actually really strongly considering. So,
okay.
More to that later. I won't say too much about it, but yeah, there are opportunities for additional crowdfunding campaigns. I'm starting to crunch the numbers on those with different eyes on this side of it than I would have before, which helps me make better publishing decisions, both for myself and it really influences design too. Like thinking about how could I design a game that's going to be easy to publish?
Yeah, you think about the whole process, right?
Yeah, or that's going to be possible to publish. and sell, because that's
Yep.
something that I wasn't thinking about entirely as I was designing before. Now I have that mindset.
That's cool.
So yeah, so I'm
I think I'll only truly feel like a publisher once I like get pitches and could publish someone else's game. Because right now it just feels like a a fun project that I'm working on by myself or for myself, and then but to like actually start publishing other people's games, I think will be a really cool moment. And it sounds like you're getting there as well, so that's very cool.
yeah, it's super cool. It's great to even have the like have it in the realm of possibility.
Yeah,
It's like, oh, cool, like nice. Things
could
are like
happen.
moving forward. But yeah, so got a couple games that I'm working on in development right now. Actually, I have three that I'm working on that are in a stage that I would call um, I would call publishable games, right? Like
Yep.
these are things that are like they have been play tested enough to where it's like, okay, that's cool. Like I'm interested.
Yeah.
And I've heard that from enough people to say, okay, well, there are a few games that I'm working on my own design that I could continue to run with and build out a publishing schedule. And then, like I said, heard a couple pitches, have maybe one potential there. So yeah, there's great opportunity ahead for a publishing schedule, which is great.
Exciting.
Yeah. One other thing that I want to be sure to say before we wrap
Mm-hmm.
is one of my biggest, because I know that a big part of KickSaga is data. One
Yes.
data element that I would strongly recommend Kickstarter creators consider is that 30-30-30 funding, that 33-33-33. With that in mind, considering the like growth that organic traffic gives you from Kickstarter, I would encourage publishers not to be afraid of lowering their funding goals. I was very afraid of it. I was very reticent to do it.
Yeah.
It was the best advice that I received from Max prior to funding my thing. He went, dude, your funding goal is way too high. You're not going to hit it. Or if you do hit it, it's going to be so late that it's going to result in lots of cancellations.
Yikes. Yeah.
For me, knowing that I funded at 17 grand and that was a pretty like predictable number, I would have backed that out to say, well, what can I do at 30%? Because if I'm going to get 33% of my traffic in the first 2 days, had I set my Kickstarter goal where it should have been, given that traffic, I would have still raised $17,000, but I would have funded in the first 2 days. And who knows what that additional bump would have done for the mid campaign.
Interesting.
For me, I cut my funding goal from, I think I was initially at like 12.5 to 9.5. 9.5 I hit in about 3.5 days. 12.5 I didn't hit till nearly the end of the campaign. But had I set it where it should have been at $6,000 at 5.9 thousand, I still would have raised $17,000, but I would have hit that in the first 2 days. So for all of the work that I put to push towards that goal, my problem was not the backers or the funding, the total funding. It was where I'd set my initial goal.
Interesting. Yeah.
So yeah, just something to consider. It's all a math game. And the thing people say is like, well, is that disingenuous? And it's not really, because I was shooting for 1,000 copy print run. But if I funded less and say it just stopped after that first day at $5,000, I would have just printed 500 copies. And it still would have covered my manufacturing bill. It would have been fine. I just had a different goal in mind for myself and was pressing too hard for that instead of listening to the math and the predictions and following that. So yeah, just something I would advise.
Yeah, I like that, because everything that I've heard is that the sooner you can fund, the better, because that just adds to the momentum and gets the organic traffic going even more. And so as long as you can, set the goal to a place where even if you made that minimum goal, you could still at least make the game. I think that's the most important thing. And then again, you can, of course, hope to overshoot that throughout the rest of the campaign using that 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 thing, which seems pretty consistent across all projects that I've heard about.
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
Yeah.
Great advice. Thank you for that. So I think that's all I had for you. A lot of really good insight. I think this is going to help a lot of folks give a peek behind the curtain about what's waiting for them during and after their Kickstarter campaign. Any other words of wisdom you want to leave us with before we wrap up?
No, I would just I would reiterate the best pieces of advice I received, and just leave with those. One, I think shorter campaigns are actually okay. It reduces stress. It takes away some of that like biological anxiety that just comes along with running something like this. Build in breaks. Build in time for your mental health, and trust the math. I think is a really important one. There are a lot of smart people out there, and if you listen to their wisdom, you can gain a lot from it, and it can help you avoid costly mistakes. So I would really advise just listening to those voices. Like,
Yeah.
take people's word for it who've been down the road before, and having, I think, an element of going back to character things, patience and humility to say, okay, let me just think about this for a second. And also, let me just have open hands to say, maybe I don't know everything. I could learn something. I think that will go a long way towards, helping connect with your backers, helping run a successful campaign, and ultimately leading you to the outcomes that you're looking for your game. So those are kind of my words of wisdom.
Great advice. Perfect.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you, Jack, and good luck with your future endeavors with New Kingdom Gaming. We'll have to have you on again in the future to talk about, all that you've learned throughout the rest of the process of starting a publishing company. And again, we hang out in the same circles, and we're always chatting offline anyway. So I look forward to continuing to be your friend and root you on for your next project.
Thanks, Matt. Same to you. And I'd be really happy to come back anytime you want.
Awesome. And thank you guys for watching this episode of KickSaga. If you like what you saw, be sure to hit the subscribe button and that notification bell icon so you can be notified whenever we release a new episode. And if you have any questions for Jack, go ahead and leave them in the comments below, and either he or I will jump in and answer them for you. We love to see you back on a next episode of KickSaga. Until then, take care. Bye-bye.